My world felt out of balance after giving birth to my daughter. The sheer joy of having her in my arms was often eclipsed by a gnawing sense of loss. My body, once a source of pride, had changed in ways I couldn't fully grasp. The mirror became my enemy, and the woman staring back at me was a stranger. I wanted to feel like myself again, to reclaim the confidence I had lost. That's how I found myself walking into the sleek, intimidating gym 2 blocks from my house. It smelled of sweat and determination, filled with impossibly toned bodies that only deepened my insecurities. But I was there for me, I reminded myself, and no one else. A young receptionist with a blindingly white smile handed me a clipboard. I hesitated, pen hovering over the waiver, when a deep, confident voice broke my internal debate. First time? I turned and saw him, Blake. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a smile that was as warm as it was disarming. He wore a fitted black shirt and track pants, the gym's logo emblazoned on his chest. His energy was magnetic, and when he extended his hand to introduce himself, I was already captivated. I'm one of the trainers here. If you're looking for some help getting started, I'd be happy to walk you through it. I stammered something about wanting to lose the baby weight, suddenly self-conscious. His smile widened. We'll take it one step at a time. No rush. It's about feeling strong, not just looking good. I signed up for personal training sessions that day, and Blake became my guide. At first, our interactions were purely professional. He was patient, encouraging, and attentive, pushing me just enough to feel challenged but never overwhelmed. He noticed the smallest victories, a slightly deeper squat, an extra rep on the bench, and celebrated them as if I'd just won a marathon. I started looking forward to our sessions, not just for the progress I was making, but for the way he made me feel seen. As the weeks passed, our conversations shifted from fitness goals to personal lives. He told me he'd been a trainer for 8 years, that he loved hiking and had an old Labrador named Max. I shared pieces of my life too, how motherhood was simultaneously the most rewarding and exhausting thing I'd ever done, how my husband, Eric, worked long hours at his job, leaving me feeling lonely more often than I cared to admit. Blake listened without judgment, his brown eyes steady on mine, making me feel like the only person in the room. Then came the moments that blurred the lines. A hand on my lower back as he corrected my posture. A lingering glance when I walked in, cheeks flushed from the brisk winter air. Compliments that felt just a little too personal. You're really glowing today. Did you do something different with your hair? I brushed them off at first, chalking it up to his naturally charismatic personality. But there was a heat in his gaze that I couldn't ignore. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, he handed me a water bottle and sat beside me on the bench. Our knees brushed, and neither of us moved away. You're doing so well, Claire, he said, his voice softer than usual. I hope you see it too. I looked up at him, searching for the right words, but all I could manage was a nod. My heart was pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with the workout. The shift between us was subtle, but undeniable. I started to crave his attention, dressing a little nicer for the gym, applying a touch of mascara before leaving the house. He noticed, of course. Blake noticed everything. One afternoon, as the gym emptied out, he asked if I wanted to grab a smoothie from the cafe downstairs. I hesitated. What if someone saw us? But the way he looked at me made it impossible to say no. We sat in a quiet corner, talking and laughing like old friends. He reached across the table at one point to brush a stray hair from my face, and I froze, caught between the boundaries I knew I shouldn't cross and the magnetic pull I couldn't resist. It wasn't until weeks later that I overheard 2 women in the locker room talking. They weren't whispering, their voices carrying easily over the sound of running water. Did you hear about Blake? He's been dating Lauren from the Monday morning class. Lauren? I thought he was seeing Jenna from Pilates. My stomach dropped. I tried to tell myself it couldn't be true, that they were just gossiping, but a sickening feeling settled over me. I started noticing things I hadn't before, the way he smiled at certain clients, the way he lingered just a little too long in his conversations with them. During our next session, I couldn't hold back. Are you seeing anyone? I asked, trying to sound casual as I adjusted the weights on the barbell. His expression didn't change, but there was a brief pause before he answered. Why do you ask? I overheard something in the locker room, I admitted. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, Claire, I'm not sure what you heard, but I'm not in a serious relationship with anyone. The non-answer stung more than I expected. So, you're not exclusive with anyone, but you're seeing multiple people? He didn't deny it. Instead, he met my gaze with a look that was equal parts regret and defiance. It's complicated. The air between us shifted again, but this time it was colder, heavier. I finished the session in silence, my emotions ricocheting between anger, disappointment, and a hollow ache I couldn't quite name. I didn't book another session after that. Instead, I started coming to the gym at odd hours, avoiding the times I knew he'd be there. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. How easily I'd let myself fall into something that was never real. How foolish I'd been to think I was special. But in the quiet solitude of my solo workouts, something shifted. I realized I didn't need his attention to feel worthy. I was stronger than I'd given myself credit for, and not just physically. For the first time in months, I looked in the mirror and saw someone I recognized. Not the woman I used to be, but someone new, someone better. Blake's charm had been a spark, but I was the one who rekindled the fire. The weeks that followed were a test of my resolve. Every time I walked into the gym, I braced myself for the possibility of running into Blake. Sometimes I caught a glimpse of him across the floor, his effortless charm still captivating the clients who hung on his every word. I would force myself to look away, pretending not to notice the way his eyes occasionally sought me out. Each glance felt like a small betrayal of the progress I was trying to make, a reminder of how easily I'd been drawn into his orbit. But I kept coming back. Not for him, never for him again, but for me. The gym had become my sanctuary, a place where I could channel my frustration and hurt into something tangible. I pushed myself harder than ever, setting new goals, breaking personal records. It was cathartic, the way each bead of sweat felt like an exorcism of the pain I'd carried. Slowly, I was learning to stand on my own without needing someone else to validate my worth. Still, the ghost of what had almost been lingered. I found myself replaying our conversations, dissecting every word, every touch, searching for the moment I should have seen through him. There was a quiet shame in knowing how easily I'd let myself believe that his attention meant something more. Yet there was also a strange kind of gratitude. For all the hurt he'd caused, Blake had been the catalyst for my transformation. He had lit a fire I hadn't realized I needed. One evening, as I was finishing a grueling set of deadlifts, a voice interrupted my focus. "Claire, you're killing it." I turned, and there he was, leaning casually against a weight rack, his trademark smile firmly in place. My pulse quickened, not with longing, but with irritation. "Thanks," I said coolly, wiping the sweat from my brow and avoiding his gaze. "I've noticed you've been working out solo lately," he continued, ignoring my clear disinterest. "You've made incredible progress." "I mean it." I straightened, meeting his eyes with a steady calm I wasn't sure I possessed until that moment. "Thanks, Blake. But I think we both know I don't need your validation anymore." The flicker of surprise in his expression was satisfying, a small victory in a battle I hadn't even realized I was still fighting. He recovered quickly, of course, his charm as resilient as ever. "Fair enough," he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "But if you ever want to pick up where we left off, you know where to find me." The audacity of his words took me aback, but instead of responding, I simply turned and walked away. That was the last time I spoke to him. Whatever power he had held over me was gone, replaced by a quiet resolve to keep moving forward. The days turned into weeks, and the ache of what had almost been began to dull. I threw myself into my routine, not just at the gym, but in every aspect of my life. I started cooking healthier meals, taking long walks with my daughter, even signing up for a local yoga class to balance the intensity of my weightlifting. With each passing day, I felt more like myself, or perhaps someone new entirely. My husband, Eric, started noticing the changes too. At first, he seemed wary, as if unsure of the woman who was emerging from the shell of the person he thought he knew. But as I opened up to him about my struggles, the insecurity, the loneliness, the need to reclaim something for myself, he began to understand. Our conversations became deeper, more honest. For the first time in years, we started to feel like partners again. One night, as we sat together on the couch after putting our daughter to bed, Eric reached for my hand. "I know I haven't been around as much as I should," he said quietly, "but I want to be better. For you. For us." His words broke something open in me, a well of emotion I hadn't realized I'd been holding back. Tears slipped down my cheeks, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen, not by a trainer with a charming smile, but by the man I had vowed to spend my life with. From that point on, things began to shift. We started carving out time for each other, whether it was a quick coffee date while our daughter napped or a stolen hour after she was asleep. It wasn't always easy. Old habits die hard, and the demands of parenthood didn't magically disappear, but we were both committed to rebuilding what we had almost lost. As for Blake, he became just another figure in the background of my life. Occasionally, I'd catch a glimpse of him at the gym, still charming, still magnetic, still surrounded by the same adoring crowd. But he no longer held any sway over me. Whatever spark we'd shared had burned out, leaving behind only the faintest traces of smoke. Looking back, I realized that my time with Blake had been a turning point, not because of what he gave me, but because of what he forced me to confront in myself. I had been searching for validation in all the wrong places, desperate for someone to fill the void that had opened up inside me. But in the end, it wasn't his attention or approval that healed me. It was the realization that I didn't need it. I found my strength in the quiet moments, the early mornings at the gym, the laughter of my daughter, the steady presence of a husband who was willing to fight for our marriage. And as I stood in front of the mirror one evening, looking at the woman I had become, I felt a deep, unshakable pride. I was strong, I was whole, and I was enough. The months rolled by, and my life began to settle into a new rhythm. The gym remained a part of my routine, but it no longer felt like an escape. It was a place of growth, a sanctuary where I pushed my limits and celebrated the small victories that were entirely my own. I'd replaced the weight of self-doubt with the literal weight of barbells, and the transformation wasn't just physical. I walked with a confidence I hadn't felt in years, and that strength rippled into every aspect of my life. Eric and I continued to work on our marriage. It wasn't perfect. How could it be, after everything we had neglected for so long? But the effort we both put in made a difference. We started going to therapy together, something I never would have imagined us doing before. The sessions were hard, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths about our relationship. I admitted how lonely I'd felt, how I'd craved attention in ways I hadn't even understood until Blake entered my life. Eric confessed his own struggles, the pressure he'd felt to provide for us, and how that pressure had blinded him to what I needed. Slowly, we began to rebuild, not on the shaky foundation of who we used to be, but on the strength of who we were becoming. In the midst of this rebuilding, I started to notice changes in Eric, too. He was making an effort to be more present, not just physically but emotionally. He'd come home from work and immediately dive into playtime with our daughter, his laughter filling the house in a way that felt like sunlight breaking through a storm. He surprised me with little gestures, a cup of coffee waiting for me in the morning, a handwritten note tucked into my gym bag, a date night planned without my prompting. Each gesture, small as it was, felt like a reminder that we were a team again. Meanwhile, my personal journey continued. I started setting new goals for myself, ones that extended beyond the gym. I enrolled in a part-time online course to finish a degree I had abandoned years ago. It felt daunting at first, balancing schoolwork with motherhood, marriage, and my fitness routine, but it also felt invigorating. I was reclaiming pieces of myself I'd forgotten existed. The gym, however, remained a constant. I made new friends there, women and men who shared my passion for self-improvement and who cheered me on without ulterior motives. Together, we created a little community within those walls, supporting each other through every milestone. I even started helping others, sharing tips I'd picked up along the way and encouraging newcomers who looked as intimidated as I once had. Blake, though still a presence in the gym, had faded into the periphery of my world. I saw him occasionally, still charming, still magnetic, still playing the part of everyone's favorite trainer. But whatever spell he'd once cast over me had long since been broken. If anything, I felt a quiet pity for him. His life seemed so surface level, filled with fleeting connections and shallow validation. It wasn't what I wanted, and it never had been. One day, as I was leaving the gym, I spotted Blake talking to another woman near the entrance. She was laughing at something he'd said, her face lighting up in the same way mine once had. For a moment, I felt a pang of something, not jealousy, but a bittersweet recognition of who I'd been. I shook it off quickly, walking past them without a second glance. My life was no longer defined by him or anyone else. It was mine, and it was enough. As the seasons changed, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come. My body was stronger, leaner, more capable than I ever thought it could be. But more importantly, my mind and heart were stronger too. I had learned to face my insecurities, to confront the parts of myself that had been hidden beneath years of doubt and fear. I had learned to fight for the things that mattered, to fight for my family, my dreams, and my sense of self-worth. One evening, after putting our daughter to bed, I sat with Eric on the back porch. The air was cool, the sky painted with the soft hues of twilight. He reached for my hand, his thumb tracing slow circles against my palm. "You've changed so much this year," he said, his voice filled with quiet admiration. I smiled, leaning my head against his shoulder. "I had to, but I think we both have." He nodded, his arm wrapping around me as we sat in comfortable silence. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace, not because everything was perfect, but because I knew I was strong enough to handle whatever came next. My journey wasn't over. It never would be. But I was finally in a place where I could move forward without looking back. The lessons I'd learned from my experience with Blake were ones I carried with me, not as scars, but as reminders of my growth. I had learned the difference between validation and true connection, between fleeting attention and lasting love. I had learned that strength wasn't just about muscles or endurance. It was about standing tall in the face of pain and finding the courage to keep going. And as I sat there with Eric, the man who had stood by me through it all, I realized that my life wasn't defined by the mistakes I'd made or the moments of weakness I'd endured. It was defined by the choices I made to rise above them, to grow, and to love myself enough to demand better. That night, as I closed my eyes, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for the easy times, but for the hard ones. Because without them, I wouldn't be the woman I was today.
Strong,
Resilient,
whole.
and ready for whatever came next. The next phase of my life unfolded with a steadiness I had come to appreciate. Gone were the dramatic highs and crushing lows that once seemed to define my days. Instead, there was a quiet rhythm, a sense of balance that I hadn't realized I was capable of creating. The gym remained a cornerstone of my routine, but it had shifted in meaning. It was no longer just a place to chase physical goals or drown out my emotions. It had become a place where I felt empowered. The weights were not burdens. They were symbols of how far I had come. Eric and I continued to rebuild our relationship, layer by layer, like carefully restoring an old house. Some days were harder than others, especially when the demands of work, parenting, and everyday life threatened to pull us back into old patterns. But we'd learned how to recognize the warning signs and how to pull each other back before the distance grew too great. We talked more, laughed more, and leaned on each other in ways we hadn't for years. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was real, and it was ours. My daughter was growing quickly, her laughter a constant reminder of the joy that had been with me all along, even in my darkest moments. Watching her discover the world felt like rediscovering it myself. She loved to mimic my workouts, her tiny arms lifting imaginary weights as she announced proudly, "I'm strong like Mommy." Those moments filled me with a pride that words could never fully capture. I had started this journey for myself, but knowing that I was setting an example for her made it all the more meaningful. One afternoon, as I was sorting through a box of old photos, I came across a picture of myself from before my daughter was born. I was smiling, my arms draped around Eric's shoulders, the two of us standing on a beach during a long-ago vacation. I stared at the photo for a long time, trying to reconcile that version of myself with the woman I was now. She had been happy, yes, but there was something missing in her eyes, a depth, a confidence that I had only recently found. I realized that while I had once longed to go back to being her, I no longer did. I didn't need to. The woman I had become was stronger, wiser, and more complete. My relationships with others began to change too. The friends I made at the gym became an important part of my life, offering a camaraderie that was genuine and uplifting. We supported each other not just in fitness but in life, sharing stories, advice, and the occasional glass of wine after a particularly tough week. These connections reminded me of the importance of community, of surrounding myself with people who celebrated my victories and lifted me up when I stumbled. I also reconnected with old friends I had unintentionally drifted away from during the whirlwind of motherhood and self-doubt. One of those friends, Jenna, had been my closest confidant in college. We met for coffee one afternoon, and it was as if no time had passed. She listened as I recounted the highs and lows of the past year, her expressions shifting between concern and admiration. "You've been through so much," she said, her voice filled with empathy. "But you're stronger for it. I can see that." Her words stayed with me long after our conversation ended. They reminded me of the importance of perspective, of how far I had come not just in the physical sense, but in every other way that mattered. I started to reflect on what I wanted for the future, not just for myself, but for my family. I realized I didn't want to merely exist. I wanted to thrive, to chase dreams that I had once set aside. It was that realization that led me to finally enroll in a certification program to become a personal trainer. The idea had been simmering in the back of my mind for months, sparked by my own journey and the desire to help others find their strength. At first, the thought of starting something new felt daunting. Could I balance it with everything else in my life? Would I be good enough? But then I remembered the version of myself who had walked into the gym that first day, nervous, insecure, unsure of her place. If she could overcome her fears and grow into the person I was now, surely I could take this next step. The coursework was challenging but invigorating. I studied anatomy, exercise science, and nutrition during nap times and late into the night, fueled by a determination I hadn't felt in years. Eric supported me every step of the way, taking on extra responsibilities at home so I could focus on my studies. When I finally passed the certification exam, the sense of accomplishment was overwhelming. I had done it, not just for myself, but for the person I had been and the person I was becoming. As I started taking on my first clients, I saw pieces of myself in each of them. There was the young mother trying to reclaim her identity, the college student battling self-doubt, the retiree wanting to feel strong again. Guiding them on their journeys felt like coming full circle, a way of giving back to the process that had saved me. Each success story, each breakthrough moment, reminded me of why I had started this path in the first place. One day, as I was wrapping up a session, I saw Blake across the gym. He was working with a new client, his charm still as potent as ever. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and he gave me a nod. I nodded back, not with anger or regret, but with quiet acknowledgement. He had been a part of my story, a chapter that had taught me valuable lessons about myself. But that chapter was long closed, and I had no desire to revisit it. Life continued to unfold in ways I couldn't have predicted. My career as a trainer grew, and I found fulfillment in helping others discover their strength. My relationship with Eric deepened, rooted in a renewed sense of partnership and love. And my daughter, ever curious and full of energy, reminded me daily of the joy and wonder that life had to offer. Through it all, I carried with me the knowledge that I was capable of more than I had ever believed. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. I had found my strength, not in fleeting moments of validation, but in the steady, unshakable foundation I had built within myself. And as I looked toward the future, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready. As the years passed, the changes I had made in my life became not just habits, but part of my identity. I no longer thought of my transformation as a project with a defined end. Instead, it was a continuous journey, one that evolved as I grew. The gym remained a constant, but my motivations shifted. I wasn't chasing a specific weight or size anymore. I was chasing strength, both physical and mental. Each session was a reminder of how far I'd come, of the resilience I'd built one lift, one rep, one moment at a time. My work as a trainer flourished, and with it came new opportunities. I started hosting small group classes for women, many of whom were navigating the same challenges I had faced: postpartum struggles, insecurities, the feeling of losing themselves in the roles they played. Helping them rediscover their strength was deeply rewarding. I saw in their progress the same spark I had found in myself, and it was a privilege to guide them toward a place where they could feel proud of their accomplishments. Eric's support never wavered, and our marriage grew stronger with each passing year. We had learned to communicate in a way we hadn't before, sharing not just our daily routines but our fears, hopes, and dreams. He encouraged me in every step of my career, even suggesting that I consider opening my own gym one day. It was a daunting idea, one I wasn't ready to tackle just yet, but knowing he believed in me meant more than I could put into words. Our daughter, too, became a source of endless inspiration. As she grew, her curiosity and determination reminded me of the importance of nurturing those qualities in myself. She loved joining me during my at-home workouts, her little face lighting up as she mimicked my movements with a mix of seriousness and delight. "Look, Mommy, I'm strong too," she'd exclaim, lifting a toy weight over her head. Those moments were a reminder of why I had started this journey in the first place, not just for myself, but for the example I could set for her. One day, as I was tidying up after a particularly busy training session, my phone buzzed with a text from Jenna. "Hey, wanna grab lunch? I have a crazy idea. I need to run by you." Curious, I agreed, and an hour later, we were seated at a small cafe near the gym. Over salads and iced tea, she leaned in with an excited grin. "You've been doing so much amazing work with your clients," she said. "What if we teamed up and did something bigger?" I blinked at her, confused. "Bigger? Like what?" "A women's wellness retreat," she said, her eyes sparkling. "A weekend getaway where we combine fitness, mindfulness, and community. You lead the workouts, I handle the yoga and meditation, and we bring in guest speakers for nutrition and self-care. We could create a space for women to reset and recharge." The idea was exhilarating but intimidating. "That sounds incredible," I said slowly. "But do you really think we could pull it off?" "Absolutely," she said, her confidence contagious. "You've already built a following with your clients. People trust you. And I've been looking for a way to expand my practice. This could be something amazing." The more we talked, the more the idea took shape. By the time we left the cafe, we had a tentative plan and a list of next steps. Over the following months, we poured ourselves into the project, finding a venue, creating a schedule, and promoting the retreat to our networks. It was hard work, but it felt purposeful, and the excitement of building something from the ground up was unlike anything I'd experienced before. The retreat, when it finally happened, exceeded all our expectations. Women from all walks of life came together, sharing their stories, their struggles, and their triumphs. There were tears, laughter, and moments of quiet reflection that reminded me of my own journey. Watching them find connection and empowerment in the space we had created was one of the most fulfilling experiences of my life. Afterward, as Jenna and I sat on the porch of the retreat center, overlooking the rolling hills of the countryside, she turned to me with a smile. "We did it," she said simply. I nodded, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. We really did. That retreat marked the beginning of a new chapter. Jenna and I continued to organize similar events, each one growing in scope and impact. The work was challenging but deeply rewarding, and it reinforced my belief in the importance of community and connection. I saw firsthand how transformative it could be for women to feel seen, supported, and celebrated. Through it all, I never lost sight of the lessons I had learned along the way. My life wasn't perfect. No one's ever is, but it was full, vibrant, and meaningful. The woman I had become was unrecognizable from the one who had first walked into that gym all those years ago, but I carried her with me, a reminder of where I had started and how far I had come. One evening, as Eric and I sat together on the couch, our daughter fast asleep upstairs, he turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You've built something incredible," he said. "Not just for yourself, but for so many others." I smiled, resting my head on his shoulder. "I couldn't have done it without you," I said honestly. "You've always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." His arm tightened around me, and we sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from years of shared history and hard-won understanding. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for him, but for everything that had brought me to where I was. The challenges, the mistakes, the moments of doubt, they had all shaped me, making me stronger, more compassionate, and more whole. As I closed my eyes that night, I thought about the future. There were still goals to chase, dreams to pursue, and challenges to face. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready, armed with the knowledge that I was capable of weathering whatever storms came my way. My journey was far from over, but that was the beauty of it. Life was a constant process of growth and discovery, and I was determined to embrace it all. The retreat business with Jenna became a cornerstone of my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. What had started as a single weekend event grew into a series of workshops, pop-up classes, and even an online community where women from around the country could connect and support one another. We called it Empower Her, a name that felt fitting for what we were trying to achieve. Every woman who walked through our doors, whether physically or virtually, brought her own story, her own battles, and her own triumphs. It was humbling to see how much strength and resilience could exist in so many different forms. Balancing my personal life with this growing venture wasn't always easy, but it was worth every late night and early morning. Eric remained my rock, stepping up in ways I never expected. On days when I was overwhelmed, juggling client calls, retreat planning, and the chaos of parenting, he'd swoop in with dinner already made or a plan to take our daughter out for a few hours so I could catch my breath. We had become a team again, and that foundation was what allowed me to keep building. One of the most rewarding aspects of Empower Her was seeing the ripple effect it had on the women who joined. They didn't just come for the workouts or the mindfulness sessions, they left with a renewed sense of purpose, often taking what they learned and sharing it with others in their own lives. Some started running clubs, others launched their own small businesses, and a few even reached out to thank us for helping them rediscover their confidence after years of feeling lost. Those messages were a constant reminder of why we were doing this, and they fueled me on the days when exhaustion threatened to creep in. At home, my daughter was growing into a spirited, curious little girl who seemed to absorb everything around her. She loved to sit with me while I worked, her tiny hands doodling in a notebook as I went over retreat schedules or brainstormed ideas with Jenna. One afternoon, she looked up at me with wide eyes and said, "Mommy, when I grow up, I want to be strong like you." Her words hit me like a wave, filling me with both pride and a renewed sense of responsibility. I wasn't just building a business or transforming my own life. I was shaping the way she saw herself and the world. As Empower Her expanded, we began collaborating with other professionals in the wellness space. Nutritionists, mental health counselors, and even career coaches joined our network, offering a holistic approach to self-improvement. The retreats became richer and more impactful, blending physical fitness with mental and emotional well-being. Each event felt like a celebration of what women were capable of achieving when given the tools and support they needed. But growth also brought challenges. With more events and a larger team to manage, the pressure began to mount. Jenna and I had our share of disagreements, particularly about how quickly we should expand and what direction the business should take. There were moments when I doubted whether we could sustain the momentum we had built, but those moments were fleeting. We had a shared vision, and despite the occasional friction, our friendship remained strong. We leaned on each other during the tough times, just as we celebrated together during the victories. One of the biggest milestones came when we decided to host our first international retreat. It was a bold move, one that required months of planning and countless logistical hurdles, but we were determined to make it happen. We chose a serene location in Costa Rica, nestled between the jungle and the ocean, where participants could truly disconnect from their daily lives and focus on themselves. When the retreat finally happened, it was nothing short of magical. Watching women from different backgrounds and cultures come together, sharing their stories under the golden glow of a sunset, was a moment I'll never forget. On the final night of the retreat, as everyone gathered around a bonfire on the beach, one of the participants stood up to speak. Her name was Lisa, and she had been quiet for most of the weekend, participating in the sessions but keeping to herself during meals and downtime. As the fire crackled and the waves lapped gently at the shore, she shared her story, a story of loss, of resilience, and of finding the strength to start over. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the group. It was a powerful reminder of why we had started this journey and how much of an impact it could have. After the retreat ended and we returned home, I found myself reflecting on all that had transpired since the day I first stepped into that gym. The path I had taken was anything but straightforward, filled with detours and moments of doubt, but it had led me to a place I never could have imagined. I was no longer the woman who sought validation from fleeting attention or external praise. I was someone who created her own sense of worth, who had built a life filled with purpose and connection. Eric and I continued to grow together, finding new ways to support each other's dreams. He surprised me one day by suggesting that we take a family trip, just the three of us, to reconnect and recharge. We chose a cabin in the mountains, a cozy retreat where we could escape the noise of everyday life and simply be together. Those few days, filled with hikes, laughter, and quiet moments by the fire, were a gift. They reminded me of the importance of slowing down, of savoring the present instead of constantly chasing the next goal. As Empower Her approached its 5th anniversary, Jenna and I decided to host a gala to celebrate. It was a chance to look back on everything we had accomplished and to thank the community that had supported us along the way. The event was a whirlwind of emotions, with speeches, stories, and a palpable sense of pride in what we had built. Standing on that stage, looking out at a room filled with women who had been part of our journey, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not just for the success of the business, but for the woman I had become in the process. Life continued to evolve, bringing new challenges and opportunities, but through it all, I held on to the lessons I had learned. Strength wasn't about perfection or never faltering. It was about rising after every stumble, finding beauty in the struggle, and continuing to grow. And as I looked toward the future, I felt ready for whatever came next, knowing that the journey was far from over and that each step would be worth taking. The gala marked a turning point in more ways than one. It wasn't just a celebration of what Jenna and I had built with Empower Her. It was a realization that this work had become something much larger than either of us had imagined. Standing there in that room, surrounded by women who had shared their stories of transformation, growth, and resilience, I felt a sense of purpose that was almost overwhelming. It wasn't about the business anymore. It was about creating a legacy, something that would continue to empower others long after I was gone. After the gala, we were flooded with messages and opportunities. New partnerships, collaborations, and invitations to speak at events poured in. At first, it was exhilarating, a validation of all the hard work we'd put in. But as the demands grew, I found myself facing a familiar challenge: balance. Empower Her had always been a passion, but it was beginning to consume every spare moment of my life. My days were packed with meetings, planning sessions, and travel, and while I loved the work, I started to notice the toll it was taking on my personal life. Eric, ever supportive, encouraged me to step back and reassess. One evening, as we sat on the couch after putting our daughter to bed, he gently broached the subject. "You've built something incredible," he said, his voice steady. "But you're running yourself ragged. Maybe it's time to think about what you really want moving forward." His words lingered with me, and over the next few weeks, I began to evaluate where I was and where I wanted to go. I realized that while I was proud of everything Empower Her had become, I didn't want it to come at the expense of the other parts of my life that mattered just as much. My family, my friendships, and even my own personal growth had started to take a back seat, and I knew something had to change. Jenna and I sat down for a long, honest conversation. She had been feeling similar pressures, and together we decided to make some adjustments. We brought in a team of trusted colleagues to help manage the day-to-day operations, allowing us to step back from the constant grind. It was a difficult decision. Letting go of control is never easy, but it was the right one. With more time and space, I was able to reconnect with the things that brought me joy outside of work. I started taking weekends off completely, something I hadn't done in years. Those weekends became sacred time for my family. We explored new hiking trails, spent lazy mornings making pancakes, and even started a small garden in our backyard. My daughter loved digging in the dirt, her laughter echoing as she unearthed worms and planted tiny seeds. Watching her grow and thrive reminded me of the importance of being fully present in the moments that mattered most. With this renewed focus on balance, I also found myself revisiting old passions. I started writing again, something I hadn't done since college. At first, it was just for me, short reflections, stories, and journal entries, but over time, I began to see it as another way to connect with others. I started a blog, sharing pieces of my journey, both the triumphs and the struggles. To my surprise, it resonated with people. Readers wrote to say how much they related to my experiences, how my words had helped them feel less alone. That connection, built through vulnerability and honesty, became another source of fulfillment. Empower Her continued to grow, but in a way that felt sustainable and aligned with the values Jenna and I had set out to uphold. We expanded our online community, launched new initiatives focused on mental health and self-care, and even published a book filled with stories from the women who had been part of our journey. Each step felt like a continuation of the mission we had started, but without the all-consuming pressure that had once weighed me down. As the years went on, I watched my daughter flourish. She was curious, fearless, and full of questions about the world. One day, as we were sitting together on the porch, she looked up at me with her big, expressive eyes and asked, "Mommy, what's your favorite thing about what you do?" The question caught me off guard, but after a moment, I smiled. "Helping people see how strong they are," I said. "Sometimes we forget how much we're capable of, but when we find that strength, it changes everything." She nodded thoughtfully, as if filing the answer away for later, and I felt a swell of pride. She was growing up in a world where she would know her own strength, where she would see firsthand what it meant to pursue a life of purpose and balance. That, more than anything, felt like my greatest accomplishment. As I entered the next phase of my life, I found myself reflecting often on the path that had brought me here. The twists and turns, the heartbreaks and triumphs had all shaped me in ways I never could have predicted. I thought about the version of myself who had walked into that gym so many years ago, unsure of her place in the world. She wouldn't have recognized the woman I had become, but I hoped she would have been proud. The journey wasn't over. It never would be. Life would continue to throw challenges my way, but I felt ready for them. I had built a life rooted in strength, love, and authenticity, and that foundation was unshakable. Whatever came next, I would face it with open arms, knowing that every step forward was part of the story I was still writing. Years turned into a decade, and my life continued to evolve in ways that felt both surprising and deeply satisfying. Empower Her had become a well-established name in the wellness world, but it no longer consumed every corner of my existence. Jenna and I had grown into our roles as leaders, delegating much of the operational work to a trusted team that shared our vision. This allowed us to focus on the parts of the business we loved most, connecting with women, sharing our stories, and continuing to learn and grow alongside the community we had built. At home, life was rich and full. My daughter, now a teenager, was blossoming into an incredible young woman. She had inherited her father's sense of humor and my drive, though she wielded both with a confidence that was entirely her own. She excelled in school, pursued her passions with a fierce determination, and had a group of friends who seemed to adore her. I couldn't have been prouder of the person she was becoming, though I often wondered where the time had gone. It felt like only yesterday she was toddling around the house, asking endless questions about the world. Eric and I had grown closer over the years, weathering the ups and downs of marriage with a resilience that came from mutual respect and unwavering support. We had learned to navigate life's challenges as a team, whether it was figuring out how to parent a headstrong teenager, dealing with the stresses of work, or simply keeping our relationship fresh and connected. Date nights had become a regular occurrence again, and we often found ourselves reminiscing about the early days of our relationship, laughing at the naivete of our younger selves. One evening, as we sat together on the back porch with glasses of wine in hand, Eric turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about what's next?" he asked. I tilted my head, considering the question. "What do you mean?" He gestured around us. "You've accomplished so much, with Empower Her, with our family, with everything. But knowing you, I have a feeling you're already dreaming about the next chapter." I smiled, touched by how well he knew me. He was right, of course. While I was proud of everything I had achieved, I couldn't help but feel that there was more waiting for me. I just wasn't sure what form it would take. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting on his words. I had spent so much of my life helping others find their strength, but what was my next step? What did I want to build, to explore, to leave behind as my legacy? The answer didn't come immediately, but the question lingered, nudging me gently toward new possibilities. One afternoon, while cleaning out a closet, I stumbled across an old journal I had kept during the early days of my transformation. Flipping through its pages, I was struck by the raw honesty of my words. There were entries filled with pain and doubt, but there were also moments of triumph and gratitude. It was a chronicle of a woman finding her way back to herself, and as I read, I felt a spark of inspiration. What if I wrote a book? Not just a blog or a collection of essays, but a full-length memoir that told the story of my journey, the struggles, the setbacks, the victories, and the lessons I had learned along the way. It felt like a daunting idea, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the natural next step. I wanted to share my story in a way that could reach even more people, offering them the same hope and encouragement that had guided me through my own challenges. I began writing late at night, after the house was quiet and my mind was free to wander. The process was both cathartic and challenging, forcing me to revisit moments I had long buried and to find the words to articulate emotions that had once felt too big to name. Some nights, the words flowed effortlessly, while others felt like a battle against my own doubts. Who was I to think my story was worth telling? But every time those thoughts crept in, I reminded myself of the women who had reached out to me over the years, sharing how my honesty had helped them feel less alone. If my story could touch even one more person, it would be worth it. Months turned into a year, and finally, the manuscript was complete. Jenna was the first person I shared it with, and her reaction was everything I had hoped for. She laughed, cried, and hugged me tightly when she finished reading. "This is going to change lives," she said, her voice full of conviction. With her encouragement, I began the process of finding a publisher. It was a roller coaster of highs and lows, rejections, revisions, and moments of self-doubt, but eventually, my book found a home. The day I held the first printed copy in my hands was surreal, a culmination of years of growth and hard work. The cover bore my name, and the title, Finding Strength, A Journey of Rediscovery, felt like the perfect encapsulation of everything I wanted to convey. The book's release was met with an outpouring of support. Women from all over wrote to share their own stories, how they had seen pieces of themselves in my words and found hope in the lessons I had shared. The experience was humbling and deeply rewarding, a reminder that our stories have the power to connect us in ways we can't always predict. With the success of the book, new opportunities arose. I was invited to speak at conferences, host workshops, and even appear on a few podcasts and television shows. At first, the attention felt overwhelming, but I quickly realized that it wasn't about me, it was about the message. If sharing my journey could help others find their strength, then it was worth stepping outside my comfort zone. Through it all, my family remained my anchor. Eric and my daughter were my biggest cheerleaders, grounding me when the whirlwind of public attention threatened to pull me away from what truly mattered. Our home was my safe haven, a place where I could shed the roles of author, speaker, and entrepreneur and simply be myself. As I moved into this new chapter of my life, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything that had brought me to this point. The heartbreaks, the triumphs, the moments of doubt, and the bursts of courage, they had all shaped me into the woman I was today. My journey was far from over, but I was ready for whatever came next, knowing that each step forward was another opportunity to grow, to learn, and to make a difference. And that, more than anything, was what made life so extraordinary. Years later, I found myself standing on a stage at a small event organized by one of Empower Her's chapters. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the room was filled with women from all walks of life. Many of them had been part of our retreats or followed our journey through the years. Some were newcomers, drawn by the stories they'd heard. As I looked out at their faces, a wave of emotion washed over me. These women, with their courage and resilience, were a testament to the power of community, strength, and self-discovery. I share my story once again, not the polished, simplified version, but the raw truth of it. The pain, the missteps, the doubts, and, ultimately, the triumphs. I talked about the moments when I felt lost, the people who helped me find my way, and the lessons I carried with me. When I finished, the room was silent for a moment before erupting into applause. But what mattered most wasn't the applause. It was the conversations that followed. Women came up to me, sharing their own stories, their struggles, their hopes. It was a reminder of why I had started this journey in the first place. As the event wound down, I slipped outside to catch a breath of fresh air. The cool night breeze carried the faint scent of fallen leaves, and the stars were just starting to peek through the twilight sky. Eric found me there, his warm presence a constant comfort. He wrapped his arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. "You were incredible," he said, his voice soft but steady. I smiled, leaning into him. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." He chuckled. "Maybe. But you're the one who found the strength to make it happen. I just got to watch you shine." His words stayed with me as we drove home that night, our daughter asleep in the back seat, her head resting against the window. I thought about everything we had built, not just Empower Her, but our family, our life, and the love that had carried us through so many trials. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was ours. In the months that followed, I began to step back even more from the day-to-day operations of Empower Her. Jenna and I had always envisioned it as something bigger than ourselves, and it was time to let the next generation of leaders take the reins. Watching them bring new ideas and fresh energy to the organization filled me with pride. Empower Her had outgrown its beginnings, but its heart remained the same, a place where women could find their strength and lift each other up. At home, I found joy in the simple things. Quiet mornings with Eric, long talks with my daughter as she prepared for college, and moments of solitude where I could reflect on all that life had given me. I kept writing, not for an audience, but for myself, letting the words flow as a way to process and celebrate the journey I had traveled. One sunny afternoon, as I sat on the porch with a steaming cup of tea, I opened my journal and wrote a single line. "Life is a constant evolution, and in every stage, we have the power to choose who we want to be." I closed the journal with a sense of peace, knowing that no matter what lay ahead, I had everything I needed within me to face it. The journey that had started in a moment of pain and doubt had transformed into a life full of love, purpose, and connection. It wasn't about the accolades or the achievements. It was about the people, the experiences, and the lessons that had shaped me. And as I looked out at the golden light of the setting sun, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the woman I had been, the woman I had become, and the woman I was still becoming. Life was a gift, and I was ready to embrace it one moment at a time.